After being excluded from every family reunion for 8 years, my parents suddenly showed up at my mansion, and I couldn't believe the nerve. Watch what happens next. I'm Isabella, 28, and this story will change how you see family forever. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real family drama and emotional courage stories. My hands froze on the coffee mug as I stared at the security monitor. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Two figures were standing at the iron gate of my mansion, hesitating, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. My heart skipped a beat, and a strange mix of anger and disbelief tightened my chest. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It can't be, not them." "Hi, my name is Isabella. I'm 28, and these are my parents. People who spent the last 8 years deliberately leaving me out of every single family reunion, birthday party, holiday gathering, and even milestones that mattered most. And now, here they were, standing awkwardly at my gate, as if 8 years of ignoring me could be erased with a simple visit. I tilted my head, staring at the grainy video feed. Their familiar postures, the way my mom always clasped her hands nervously, the way my dad shifted his weight and tapped his foot, sent memories rushing back like an unstoppable wave. I remember the first time I realized I was being excluded. I was 20, excited for my college graduation party, only to hear that my parents and cousins had gone out to celebrate without me. At the time, I thought it was a mistake, something trivial. But the years piled on, one event after another, each exclusion carving a little deeper into my heart. And here they were, as if nothing had happened, standing at my gate. I swallowed hard and set my mug down, trying to steady my racing mind. Should I answer? Should I confront them? Or should I do what I had done for the past 8 years, protect myself from their neglect, and walk away? I moved closer to the monitor, squinting at their faces, noting the subtle changes that time had carved into them. My mother's hair had streaks of silver, and my father's posture seemed more slouched than I remembered. Yet, despite these small signs of aging, I recognized that same arrogance, that same aura of entitlement that had made me feel invisible for so long. I couldn't help but notice how they hesitated, glancing around as if waiting for someone to notice them. My neighborhood was quiet with only a few joggers and dog walkers passing by, and I could almost feel the awkward tension radiating from them. The gate, usually a simple security measure, suddenly felt like a barrier between their past wrongs and my present life, a silent fortress protecting my hard-won independence. I pressed a finger to the screen. Why now? I whispered under my breath. What could possibly have brought them here? I replayed the last 8 years in my mind. I had grown, built my career, moved into this house, and created a life that was entirely mine. For years, they had refused to see me, refused to acknowledge my achievements, refused even to send a card on Christmas. And now, suddenly, they had the nerve to appear at my doorstep, expecting what? Forgiveness? Acceptance? As I stood there, a strange feeling of power surged within me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the girl left out on the sidelines. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I could let them in, I could confront them, or I could let them stand there. Awkward, uncomfortable, powerless. The idea of letting silence do the talking appealed to me more than I had expected. I stepped away from the monitor for a moment and looked around my living room. The space reflected my life, carefully curated, warm, but private. Photos of my friends and me, vacations I had taken alone, and with chosen family, framed achievements, and small awards, all reminders of the life I had built without their approval. And yet their presence at the gate made me feel a stir of old emotions, anger, betrayal, and the ghost of longing I had buried deep inside. The camera shifted slightly, and I could see my mother fidgeting with her scarf, twisting it nervously as she glanced up at the mansion. My father's hands were shoved into his pockets, tapping lightly against his thighs, and I imagined the stories they were silently telling each other about why I might finally open the door. I felt a shiver, not from fear, but from anticipation. I moved closer to the window, peering through the blinds. They were awkward and tentative, clearly unsure how to proceed. I remembered the countless times I had imagined this moment, what I would say, how I would react, and whether I could hold back tears of frustration and hurt. Reality, however, felt different, heavier, sharper, more intoxicating in its tension. A sudden noise snapped me from my reverie, a car door closing down the street. They flinched, their heads snapping toward the sound. I realized they were hyper-aware of every little movement, every passerby, as if the world was judging their intrusion. A part of me almost felt sorry, almost wished I could invite them in and talk like nothing had happened. But another, stronger part of me, the part that had been building a fortress around my heart for years, wanted nothing more than to let them stew outside, facing the discomfort they had once so casually inflicted on me. I walked back to the monitor and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. My mind began racing with scenarios. What would happen if I ignored them completely? Would they leave in shame, realizing the weight of their past actions? Or would they persist, insisting, pleading, manipulating, forcing me to react, forcing me to relive old wounds? The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I noticed my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, pause his morning jog and glance toward the gate. My parents waved awkwardly at him, and he gave a polite nod before continuing. A small part of me smirked. This public awkwardness was something I had secretly imagined as poetic justice for years. The irony of them standing there, exposed and vulnerable, was not lost on me. I poured myself another cup of coffee and carried it to the window, settling into the armchair that faced the front of the house. I studied them in silence, letting every detail sink in. My mother's anxious glances, my father's rigid posture, the way they whispered to each other and occasionally looked up at the mansion. It all painted a picture of two people who had finally realized that the game had changed. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Minutes became hours. Yet I didn't feel the urge to rush. This was my moment to decide, and I would not be pressured. I allowed myself to feel the mixture of emotions swirling within me: anger, vindication, curiosity, and a strange, bittersweet longing for what could have been. It was intoxicating and painful all at once. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my best friend popped up. "Is everything okay? You look tense." I typed back slowly, carefully choosing words that revealed nothing. "Yes, just some unexpected visitors." Long story. I knew I had to maintain my composure. 8 years of neglect had taught me patience and restraint, and now it was time to exercise both. I glanced at the monitor again and saw my parents' shoulders slump slightly. My mother whispered something I couldn't hear, and my father shook his head. I imagined the conversation they were having, wondering if they were reflecting on their past cruelty or simply debating how to manipulate me into opening the door. A sudden gust of wind rattled the gate, and they both jumped slightly, startled. I felt a strange thrill. It was as if the universe itself had punctuated this moment of reckoning. I leaned forward, my chin resting on my hand, and let myself savor the power of silence. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, they were the ones feeling small, exposed, and uncertain. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the driveway. My parents didn't move. They were still there, waiting, hesitant, unsure, as if time had frozen around them. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill me as I watched them. I realized that this quiet standoff, this tension, was a lesson they needed, an understanding that actions have consequences, and that years of neglect could not simply be erased with a casual visit. Finally, I spoke, not to them, but to myself. You've waited 8 years to see if I'd change, if I'd forgive, but this is my choice, and it starts now. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't call their names. I simply let them stand there, outside where they had placed me for so many years. A neighbor walked past again, giving me a curious glance. I waved casually, and my parents' heads turned toward me, momentarily embarrassed. It felt surreal, watching them fumble, realizing that the world no longer operated on their terms. I sank back into the armchair, letting a slow exhale escape my lips. I felt a mixture of relief and tension, knowing that this was only the beginning of a longer journey. But for now, I had taken control. I had observed. I had decided. And I had reclaimed the power that had been denied to me for nearly a decade. As the shadows lengthened and the air grew cooler, I sipped the last of my coffee and smiled, faintly. For the first time in years, I felt fully in command of my story. The unexpected guests at my gate had arrived, but the narrative was mine to write, and I wasn't about to let them steal it back. And to everyone watching this, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, emotional courage, and personal triumph. As I sat in my armchair, the quiet hum of the mansion surrounding me, my gaze remained fixed on the fading figures at the gate. The shadows stretching across the driveway seemed to awaken memories I had tucked away, memories that I had long tried to suppress but now demanded attention. It started as a flicker, a small, almost imperceptible ache in my chest, and soon grew into a tidal wave of recollections I couldn't escape. Each one reminded me why my parents' sudden appearance felt more like intrusion than reunion. I remembered my 18th birthday vividly. I had spent months planning a small, intimate gathering at home, inviting only a few close friends. I imagined the laughter, the balloons, the little moments that mark a coming-of-age day. But the invitation I had sent to my parents never elicited a response. Instead, I later discovered through whispers from cousins and neighborhood gossip that they had celebrated my birthday with my older sister and her friends, deliberately leaving me out. At the time, I was hurt, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they didn't get the invitation. I told myself. That excuse, however, didn't last. The pattern repeated itself with every event thereafter. Thanksgiving was the worst. I had always loved the holiday, the aroma of roasted turkey filling the house, the laughter echoing in the living room, and the warmth of family gathered together. But for 8 years, that warmth never included me. I would see photos pop up on social media, my parents smiling with cousins, my younger siblings holding plates of food, everyone celebrating except me. I remember scrolling through the images with a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The sense of being invisible was suffocating. I had learned to hide the hurt, to smile and nod when acquaintances or friends asked about my family gatherings. But inside, a quiet anger simmered. The 4th of July celebrations were no different. Fireworks lit the night sky, and I would sit on my apartment balcony watching the bursts of color reflect in my window. I imagined the laughter of my parents and cousins, the scent of grilled burgers and corn on the cob, and I felt the sting of exclusion. I could almost hear the conversations I wasn't part of, the inside jokes I would never hear, the small, intimate moments of connection that were being denied to me. I remembered one particular July when my best friend, Emma, tried to console me, bringing sparklers to my balcony. "It's silly," she said, "but we can celebrate together." And we did, marking the night with laughter, but it didn't erase the emptiness left by my family's absence. Christmas was another battlefield of exclusion. I remember decorating my apartment with twinkling lights, placing a small tree in the corner, and wrapping gifts for my friends. But I couldn't escape the knowledge that my parents were elsewhere, enjoying a lavish holiday with relatives I barely spoke to, sending me nothing but the occasional generic card signed with my name in haste. The first Christmas I spent alone after high school felt like a turning point. I realized that my parents' absence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Their choices were clear, and the message they sent was unmistakable. I didn't belong. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, family vacations, I cataloged each exclusion in my mind as I watched my parents at the gate. One memory struck harder than the rest. I was 24, freshly graduated, and had landed my first professional job. I called my parents excitedly, hoping to share the news, perhaps expecting a hint of pride or congratulations. My mother answered and said, almost casually, "That's nice, Isabella. I'm busy right now. Maybe later." Later never came. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. It wasn't just neglect. It was a dismissal of my accomplishments, as though my achievements held no weight in their eyes. Even seemingly small moments carried their own pain. I recalled my first apartment, a modest space I had worked hard to furnish and make my own. I invited them over once, hoping for a small acknowledgement of my independence. They made a passing visit, barely 20 minutes, making a show of politeness while their eyes darted toward the door, as if eager to leave. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching them sip lukewarm coffee, realizing that even my personal milestones weren't enough to earn genuine attention or care. Their indifference cut deeper than any harsh words ever could. The subtle, insidious nature of their exclusion shaped me in ways I only fully understood now. I learned to measure my excitement, to mask joy, and to temper my expectations. Every invitation I sent to family events was either ignored or met with vague excuses. Every achievement I celebrated on my own or with friends was a silent reminder that my family had chosen distance over love. And yet, despite all of this, there was a part of me that still craved validation, that hoped against hope they might notice, might care, might show even a fraction of pride. I could feel the tight knot of emotion in my chest tighten further as I remembered a more recent incident. 2 years ago, my younger brother graduated from college. I had called, hoping to attend, to share in the milestone of my sibling's life. My parents declined, citing vague reasons about scheduling conflicts and prior commitments. I later learned from a cousin that they had been at a party celebrating his achievements, surrounded by friends and extended family, without a single thought about my presence. That was the moment I truly understood the pattern. It wasn't negligence. It was choice. And it was deliberate. Even casual holidays like Easter were not spared. I would watch through social media as my parents organized egg hunts for younger cousins, taking photos and sharing moments online while ignoring my existence. It wasn't just exclusion. It was performative inclusion for others while leaving me invisible. I remembered one particular Easter when I baked a batch of cupcakes for the neighborhood kids, feeling a sense of pride in my little act of care. But the pride was tinged with sadness because I knew my family wouldn't acknowledge it. It was always easier to exclude me than to celebrate me. These flashbacks weren't just memories. They were vivid living experiences that carried the same weight now as they did years ago. The smell of roasted turkey, the sound of laughter echoing from the past, the feeling of my heart sinking each time I realized I was left out, all of it came rushing back as I watched my parents at the gate. Their tentative movements, the way they glanced around, the nervous energy radiating from them, it was almost surreal. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, overlapping with the present, demanding recognition. In some ways, the pain of exclusion had shaped me for the better. It had taught me resilience, independence, and the importance of building my own support system. Friends became my chosen family, and milestones were celebrated with those who truly valued me. I had learned to throw my own Thanksgiving dinners, organize my own birthday parties, and savor holidays without waiting for permission or acknowledgement from the people who had once caused me so much hurt. Yet, no matter how far I had come, the sting of deliberate exclusion lingered. Watching my parents at the gate, memories collided with reality in a way that made my pulse quicken. Their presence brought back the ache of every missed holiday, every ignored achievement, and every quiet moment of longing for recognition. And yet, for the first time in years, I had the choice. I could confront them, I could ignore them, or I could let the past speak through the present silence. I thought about the first time I truly confronted someone who had wronged me, not my parents, but a close friend who had betrayed my trust. I had learned then that silence could be a weapon and observation a strategy. I realized that letting someone reveal their own flaws and regrets without my interference often spoke louder than any words I could offer. That lesson now seemed more relevant than ever. As I traced my fingers along the armrest of the chair, I allowed myself a moment to imagine how they felt standing there. Did they feel shame, regret, or just impatience? I doubted they truly understood the depth of the emotional wounds they had inflicted. Their actions had left indelible marks, shaping my worldview, my expectations, and my emotional boundaries. And now, 8 years later, they were standing at my gate, unaware that the person they had ignored for so long was no longer powerless. The sun dipped lower, casting an amber glow across the driveway. Shadows stretched and twisted, mimicking the emotional turbulence within me. I realized that these flashbacks, while painful, were also a map of my growth. Each memory of exclusion, each sting of neglect, had guided me toward independence, resilience, and self-worth. I had built a life that didn't require their validation, a life where I was no longer defined by their choices. Yet, even with this strength, the emotional tension remained. Watching them fidget, whisper to each other, glance around nervously, it brought an acute awareness of the power dynamics that had shifted. For years, they had held the upper hand in our relationship through neglect and indifference. But now they were exposed, vulnerable, and entirely at my mercy. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The past had shaped me, yes, but the present was mine to command. I sank further into the armchair, letting the memories wash over me like a river, each wave stronger than the last. Birthdays, holidays, graduations, small milestones, and large achievements, they all converged into one vivid tapestry of exclusion. And through it all, I realized that the emotional weight I had carried for so long could finally be harnessed, transformed into clarity and purpose. The flashbacks, painful as they were, had brought me to this moment of reckoning. 8 years of exclusion had not broken me, they had strengthened me. And as I stared at the hesitant figures outside, the memories now served not as chains, but as a lens through which I could see my parents clearly, flawed, human, and for the first time, vulnerable in ways I had never seen before. I leaned back in my armchair, tracing the edge of the window frame with my fingers as the fading sunlight glinted off the glass. The images of the past, the memories of birthdays I never celebrated with them, the holidays I watched from a distance, the achievements they dismissed, felt sharper now, almost tangible, pressing against the edges of my mind. Yet, as vivid as the pain was, another sensation rose in its place: control. For the first time in years, I held the power. And that power came in a single, unspoken choice: to speak or remain silent. I stared at the gate, where my parents still stood, shifting nervously under the weight of my gaze. They didn't notice me, and that was precisely how I wanted it. Their awkward gestures, the tapping of my father's foot, the way my mother fiddled with her scarf, were amplified by the silence I imposed. Each minute that passed seemed to draw them further into an uncomfortable spotlight, forcing them to confront the unfamiliar tension of being powerless. For once, the rules were mine. I thought back to every year of my life. They had ignored me. The silent dinners where cousins' laughter filled the room while I sat unseen, the whispered conversations about accomplishments I had shared only to be brushed aside, the invitations that never came, the phone calls that went unanswered. It was a lifetime of quiet rejections, and yet I had survived. That survival had hardened me, but it also gave me clarity. I could feel it now, the unmistakable clarity of knowing what I deserved. My mind began to play out the possibilities, each scenario a reflection of my own power and restraint. If I opened the door, immediately I would be reacting. I would be responding to their intrusion rather than shaping the moment on my own terms. And while part of me yearned for confrontation, part of me understood that the true impact lay in suspense, in making them wait and reflect on their own actions. Silence, I realized, could speak louder than words. The air in the room grew cooler as the sun dipped lower, and a breeze rustled the edges of the blinds. I shivered, slightly, not from the temperature, but from the intensity of the moment. My parents remained at the gate, their shadows stretching long and thin across the driveway. I wondered how long they would stand there, unsure of their welcome, unsure of what to do. I imagined the conversations behind their closed expressions, the whispered debates about whether I would answer, whether I had forgiven them, whether they could simply act as if nothing had happened. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug grounding me as I considered my options. Should I confront them immediately, forcing the past into the present, or should I let the silence linger, allowing them to experience a fraction of the discomfort they had inflicted on me for years? The thought of using the very power of an action as a tool felt both thrilling and merciless, yet I couldn't deny the satisfaction that surged through me at the idea. 8 years of exclusion had taught me patience, and now that patience could become an instrument of subtle justice. A car passed slowly down the street, the tires crunching lightly over the gravel. My parents flinched, glancing briefly at the vehicle as if it might carry judgment. Their awareness of every small sound reminded me of the sharpness of their presence, their anxiety visible even from this distance. I imagined the questions running through their minds. Will she forgive us? Will she call us in? Does she even care that we're here? The answers, I knew, were entirely mine to withhold. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the flood of emotion wash over me. Anger, hurt, disappointment, and a faint, lingering curiosity about what had driven them here after so many years of neglect. Each feeling was distinct yet intertwined, creating a complex tapestry that only years of exclusion could weave. I allowed myself to sit with it, to acknowledge the pain, and then to rise above it, letting reason and strategy guide my next move. Minutes passed, and I found myself observing their behavior like an unseen director in a play. My mother adjusted her scarf again, glancing at my father, whose eyes darted toward the mansion windows. Neither spoke, and the silence hung heavily in the air, broken only by the occasional bird call or passing car. The tension was palpable, electric even, as if the space between the gate and my home was charged with all the years they had ignored me. Each second added weight to their discomfort, and each second reinforced the control I now wielded. I reflected on the lesson I had learned in my 20s, that power often came from restraint, from the ability to hold back and let others reveal themselves. In that moment, I understood that the silent decision wasn't just about punishing them. It was about asserting myself, about reclaiming the narrative of my life. I could let them in, yes, but only on my terms, and only when I was ready. I thought back to a particularly painful incident during my senior year of college. I had achieved a significant academic milestone, winning a scholarship that I had worked tirelessly for. Excited and proud, I called my parents, expecting at least a brief acknowledgement. My mother answered and said, almost dismissively, "That's great, Isabella. Congratulations, I guess." The "I guess" echoed in my memory now, sharper than it had then, a symbol of the casual neglect that had defined our relationship for years. That dismissal had shaped the foundation of my silent resolve. My father's presence at the gate reminded me of another memory. My first job promotion, celebrated with friends and mentors, but ignored by my family. I had shared the news with them via text, only to receive a vague, lukewarm response hours later. The hurt had been subtle but deep, a quiet undermining of my sense of worth. And yet it had taught me resilience, the kind that comes from realizing that validation must sometimes come from within rather than from those who have repeatedly failed to provide it. I felt a flicker of doubt, a small, almost imperceptible urge to call out, to let them know I had seen them. But I quickly pushed it aside, reminding myself that the true strength lay in patience. In this silence, I was not passive. I was deliberate. I was orchestrating the moment, letting the tension build, allowing them to confront their own unease while I remained composed and in control. The evening air cooled further, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant evening traffic. I noticed the subtle change in their posture. They were no longer shifting as nervously as before, but a quiet tension lingered in their bodies like a string stretched taut. I realized that silence was more effective than any confrontation I could have staged. In this stillness, they were forced to reflect on their own actions, on the years of exclusion and neglect. And I, for the first time in years, was a silent observer of their vulnerability. I allowed myself a moment to study the details. My mother's lips pressed together tightly, her hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of her scarf, my father's jaw clenched slightly, his eyes scanning the driveway as if searching for a path of escape. Their subtle movements were revelations, small confessions of their awareness that the balance of power had shifted. And in that realization, I found a strange sense of satisfaction, not cruelty, but justice tempered with patience. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth soothe the tension that had coiled in my chest. The mansion was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you are fully in control of a situation that once caused anxiety and pain. This silent decision was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my autonomy and asserting boundaries that had been violated for far too long. A sudden breeze rattled the blinds, and I shivered, taking a deep breath. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing against me, the gravity of the choice I had made. By remaining silent, I was sending a message more powerful than words ever could, that 8 years of exclusion could not diminish my voice, my presence, or my authority over my own life. And for the first time, I understood that silence could be louder than any confrontation. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Emma. "Everything okay? You've been quiet all day." I smiled faintly and typed back carefully. "Yeah, just thinking. Some visitors from the past." The words were deliberately vague, maintaining the suspense, keeping the control firmly in my hands. As the light faded and dusk settled over the neighborhood, I felt a mix of emotions, anticipation, satisfaction, and a quiet, lingering sadness for the years lost. But most importantly, I felt clarity. My silent decision was not just a moment of control. It was a culmination of years of growth, resilience, and understanding. For once, the power was mine entirely. I watched my parents again, still at the gate, and a small, private smile curved my lips. They didn't realize it, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. 8 years of exclusion had prepared me for this moment. And in this silence, I finally had the chance to dictate the terms, to observe, and to let the weight of their past choices settle upon them. This silent decision, I realized, was more than a choice. It was a statement that I was no longer the girl waiting for validation, the girl standing on the sidelines hoping to be noticed. I was Isabella, fully aware, fully in control, and fully capable of determining how, when, or if they would ever be allowed into my life. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, I settled deeper into my armchair, letting the silence envelop the mansion, letting the shadows stretch across the driveway, and allowing myself to feel a quiet, triumphant sense of power. The decision was made, and it was perfect in its simplicity. Watch, wait, and let the silence speak volumes. The air between the driveway and the mansion thickened as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched and folded over one another, blurring the edges of the gate, and I noticed them, the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in my parents' demeanor. It started small. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a movement far more deliberate than habitual. My father's fingers flexed nervously around the car keys, not knowing what to do with them. These minor gestures, though silent, spoke volumes. They revealed a fragility I hadn't seen in years. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth anchor me as I observed them. 8 years of neglect and exclusion had taught me to notice the tiniest of details, to read between lines of body language and half-spoken words. And now, that skill was serving me. The tension wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. I could feel it radiating from them, a subtle confession of awareness and unease. They were finally, painfully aware of the distance their choices had created, and it was reflected in every slight gesture. My mother's eyes flickered to mine briefly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of hesitation, a fleeting moment where she seemed on the verge of saying something, anything that could bridge the chasm. Her lips parted, then closed again. It was an almost imperceptible sigh, a soft intake of breath that betrayed her composure. I realized in that instant that the confident, unbothered persona I had known for years was just that, a facade. Beneath it lay uncertainty, regret, and perhaps a hint of fear at the confrontation she had so long avoided. My father, standing slightly behind her, shifted uncomfortably. His usual air of authority and quiet dismissal seemed to falter in the shadows of the driveway. He spoke a single word, low and tentative, Isabella, but it hung in the air, unfinished, as though he wasn't sure how to follow it. The pause that followed was telling. He wanted to bridge the gap, but the hesitation revealed an uncertainty he hadn't allowed himself to show for nearly a decade. I sensed in that pause a crack in the armor, an admission that words alone could not capture. I allowed a small smile to tug at the corner of my lips. Silence had been my weapon, and it was working. Their subtle confessions, their almost unnoticed cracks, were revealing more than any confrontation could. I realized that the control I held was not about denying them entry. It was about watching them reveal themselves under the weight of their own conscience. And with each passing second, I felt more in command of the situation, more attuned to the nuances of their vulnerability. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the magnolia trees lining the driveway, brushing past my parents and carrying with it a faint hint of floral perfume, my mother's signature scent. It struck me how long I had been denied moments like this, moments where presence alone carried meaning. In another life, this might have been a warm reunion. But here, under the twilight, it was a revelation. Each subtle gesture, each unspoken admission painted a picture of people who were finally beginning to understand the depth of their past choices. I remembered the first time I truly noticed cracks in their demeanor years ago, though I had misinterpreted them at the time. During a minor disagreement with my father over college tuition, his usual certainty faltered for a brief moment, only to return once he saw my reaction. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. But now, observing them at the gate, the memory resonated differently. I could see those tiny moments in hindsight, each a precursor to what I now witnessed more overtly. My mother took a hesitant step forward, her weight shifting nervously. "Isabella," she started again, this time with a softer tone, almost pleading. Her voice trembled slightly, a mixture of apprehension and an uncharacteristic vulnerability. She paused, clearly searching for the right words, but none came immediately. I could sense her internal battle between pride, guilt, and the fear of rejection. That hesitation, that struggle to articulate an apology or explanation felt like a tiny victory. They were beginning to confront the consequences of their absence, one subtle moment at a time. My father cleared his throat and adjusted his jacket as if to assert composure, but the effort fell flat. We didn't mean for," he faltered, the words catching in his throat. I felt a flicker of something unexpected, relief, not because their attempts at confession were complete or even particularly eloquent, but because it confirmed what I had sensed for years. They were aware of the hurt they had caused, and it was affecting them now. The way they fidgeted, the half-spoken sentences, and the visible uncertainty made me realize something fundamental. For the first time, I was not simply imagining their indifference. I was seeing the human side of them, imperfect and vulnerable, struggling to navigate the consequences of their choices. The cracks in their facade were small, almost imperceptible, but they were there, and I could use them to gauge what they truly felt, what they truly feared. I decided to remain silent a little longer, letting the weight of their unspoken admissions settle. Each pause, each subtle gesture, was a confession of its own. My mother's eyes glistened faintly under the fading light, and I sensed she was fighting back tears, though she didn't allow them to fall. The effort to maintain composure was almost touching in its fragility. I realized that these small, human moments were far more revealing than any confrontation could have been. In that stretch of quiet, I caught sight of my father's hand trembling slightly as he rubbed the back of his neck. It was an unguarded movement, one that betrayed a nervousness I had never seen in him before. For years, he had relied on authority and presence to command respect, but here, confronted with the consequence of exclusion, he seemed uncertain of how to proceed. His cracks were different from my mother's, less emotional, more controlled, but they were equally revealing. I noticed a subtle glance between them, a silent exchange of acknowledgement and perhaps mutual unease. Neither spoke, yet the gesture itself was a small confession. They were aware, finally, of the imbalance they had created. I felt a surge of power mixed with cautious empathy. For years, I had carried the pain of their absence alone. Now, watching them reveal these small human flaws, I understood that they were beginning a process of reckoning. However imperfectly, the quiet tension continued as moments stretched into what felt like hours. I saw my mother press her lips together, eyes darting nervously toward the mansion door. My father's gaze lingered on the driveway, then shifted to the street, as if measuring options he no longer had. Every gesture, every hesitation was a confession, an admission that their absence had consequences they hadn't anticipated. The realization settled in me like a quiet echo. Power can be subtle, and observation can be transformative. Then came the first true verbal confession, halting and hesitant. My mother cleared her throat. "Isabella, we know we hurt you," she said softly, almost whispering. My heart thudded in my chest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase years of neglect, but it was significant. The words, fragile as they were, confirmed what I had already observed. The cracks were real, and through them, the truth of their awareness shone through. My father followed slowly, his voice deep but uncertain. We didn't realize how much we were excluding you. We thought you were okay without us. The admission was clumsy, almost defensive, but it was an acknowledgement nonetheless. I could feel the weight of the past 8 years pressing into that moment. The silent confessions of missed birthdays, ignored achievements, and absent support. They were speaking imperfectly, and the cracks in their composure revealed more honesty than words alone ever could. I stayed quiet, letting them speak, letting the confessions and cracks unfold naturally. There was a subtle shift in the air, a recognition that the dynamics had changed. For 8 years, they had held the power to ignore and exclude. Now, the balance had shifted. My silence amplified the gravity of their admissions, and I realized that by allowing them to reveal themselves, I was reclaiming my voice indirectly, more powerfully than confrontation ever could. The moments continued, small and imperfect, yet each layered with significance. My mother admitted, haltingly, that she sometimes regretted the holidays she spent without me. My father spoke of occasions when he realized too late that I had accomplished something important and had failed to acknowledge it. Each statement, clumsy and incomplete, was a crack in the wall they had built between us. I noticed subtle changes in their posture, their gestures becoming more tentative, less controlled. The cracks deepened, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't expected. And yet it was beautiful in its own way, raw, imperfect, and honest. I felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction, empathy, and cautious hope. By the time the evenings settled fully into night, I understood that the small confessions and cracks had transformed the dynamic completely. They were no longer distant, unfeeling figures. They were human, flawed, and exposed, navigating the consequences of choices that had long caused me pain. And in that realization, I felt a sense of quiet triumph, not vengeance, but recognition, understanding, and the power of letting them reveal themselves. Night had fully settled over the mansion, leaving only the soft glow of the porch lights to illuminate the driveway. The shadows of the magnolia trees stretched long and thin, brushing the edges of the lawn in muted silver. My parents remained at the gate, their forms silhouetted against the faint light, an image both familiar and distant. The quiet was profound, almost reverent, and I felt a weight lift from my chest. This moment, this silence, was my final statement. I sank deeper into the armchair, wrapping my hands around the warm mug of tea I had prepared earlier. The liquid's heat seeped into my fingers, grounding me in the present while my mind drifted over the recent events. Each subtle confession, each hesitant admission had shifted the dynamics between us. But closure was not about their words. It was about what I had decided for myself. In the silence, I finally understood that my power did not come from confrontation, nor from punishment. It came from letting go while holding firm to my boundaries. A faint rustle at the gate drew my attention. My mother adjusted her scarf again, glancing toward the house as if seeking permission to approach. My father's posture stiffened slightly, and his hands clutched each other nervously. Both seemed caught between the desire to step forward and the reality that the moment required patience. I realized that my silence was doing more than withholding response. It was teaching them restraint, forcing them to confront not only my authority but their own discomfort. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the cool night air, scented faintly with magnolia blossoms and damp earth. The memories of years past, the lonely holidays, the birthdays missed, and the constant exclusion, all of it had culminated in this single, quiet moment. I did not feel triumphant in a bitter way. I felt complete. The silence I had cultivated was not empty. It was full of power, of understanding, and of resolution. I had allowed myself to observe, to feel, and to rise above the chaos of unresolved emotion. Time seemed to stretch, each second magnifying the subtle movements of my parents. They shifted their weight, exchanged glances, and whispered fragments of sentences to each other. My mother's lips moved, forming words I could not hear from here. My father ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight, eyes scanning every inch of the driveway. These small gestures were confessions in motion, revealing their discomfort, their recognition of their past mistakes, and their fragile hope that reconciliation was still possible. I thought of all the times I had waited for them in the past, years spent hoping for acknowledgement that never came. The longing had faded into frustration, and frustration into resolve. Now, in this quiet confrontation, I understood that waiting had taught me patience and discernment. It had taught me that closure was not given, it was taken quietly, deliberately, and without the need for dramatics. This realization filled me with an unexpected serenity. A subtle breeze carried the faint hum of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves. I noticed the tension in my shoulders ease as I observed the constellations beginning to dot the night sky. Each tiny light reminded me of moments in my life I had endured alone, yet thrived through, moments that had shaped me into someone resilient, perceptive, and self-reliant. I realized that closure was not about forcing my parents to say the right words or making them atone. It was about claiming my peace on my terms. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to imagine their perspective, not with sympathy, but with clarity. For years, they had been unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, the consequences of their exclusion. Now, standing at my gate, confronted by my composed silence, they were forced to reckon with reality. I could see the weight of their recognition, the subtle cracks in their defenses, and the hesitant, almost apologetic stance they had assumed. And yet, my focus was not on their guilt. It was on my own reclamation of strength. The night deepened, and I noticed the first real sign of emotional fracture. My mother's hand twitched as she clasped it over her heart, her eyes flickering toward me in a glance that was equal parts apology and vulnerability. My father's lips parted slightly, his eyes softened, and for a brief instant, I saw a reflection of humanity beneath the walls they had built for so long. The small confessions of the previous hours had expanded into a more tangible presence, the acknowledgement that the past could not be erased, only faced. I leaned back, feeling the firmness of the armchair against my back, a grounding sensation amidst the whirlwind of internal reflection. The power of silence was undeniable. My parents were present physically, yet emotionally, the bridge remained untraveled until I chose to act. I felt no rush, no urgency to dictate the terms of reconciliation. Instead, I allowed the moment to exist as it was, raw, tense, and revealing. Each second of waiting solidified my control over the narrative of my life. A soft creak of the gate startled me briefly. My father shifted his weight forward, his fingers grazing the latch, only to withdraw again. The hesitation was telling. For the first time, they were not the arbiters of action. They were subject to the patience of the person they had once excluded. Their discomfort was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, persistent awareness that they had misstepped, and that their daughter's boundaries were no longer negotiable. I reflected on my own growth over these years, the resilience built from repeated neglect, the understanding that my achievements and happiness were mine alone to define. The mansion, with its warm lights and tranquil ambience, symbolized more than wealth. It represented autonomy, accomplishment, and a life led on my terms. And now, in this silent confrontation, I realized that true closure came not from validation or forgiveness, but from the profound acknowledgement that I was in control. I rose from the armchair and walked to the window, observing my parents' tentative movements through the dim light. My mother's scarf shifted again as she adjusted it nervously, while my father's gaze remained fixed on the driveway. The tension had not vanished. It was palpable, but contained. It was a reflection of years of unspoken truths and deferred responsibilities, now converging in a single quiet moment. I understood that closure would not be immediate. It was a process, gradual and deliberate. A cricket chirped nearby, the sound unexpectedly comforting in its constancy. I realized that life, like the night, continued despite past hurts. The lessons of patience, resilience, and discernment had brought me to this point. The silence between us was not empty. It was deliberate, purposeful, and ultimately healing. In that quiet, I could feel the weight of years lifting, replaced by a profound sense of autonomy and inner peace. I moved back to the armchair, cradling the mug in my hands, and allowed my mind to wander over the small but significant moments that had defined the evening. Each hesitation from my parents, each subtle gesture of discomfort, was a reminder of the power I now held. I understood that closure did not require them to verbalize apologies or make amends in grand gestures. Their presence, fraught with awkwardness and tentative acknowledgement, was enough to validate the journey I had undertaken alone. The night air carried a faint scent of jasmine from the garden, mingling with the lingering aroma of my tea. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease from my chest. This silence, this careful orchestration of presence without immediate engagement, had become a language of its own. It spoke of boundaries, resilience, and the quiet assertion of self-worth. I realized that, after years of exclusion, I had reclaimed not only my power but my peace. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice low and unsteady. "Isabella, we understand now." The words were not elaborate, nor were they perfect. Yet, in their simplicity, they carried the weight of acknowledgement. My father nodded slightly, his eyes meeting mine in a fleeting, tentative connection. I remained seated, allowing the silence to absorb their words, letting the significance of the moment resonate without immediate response. This was closure, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through presence, observation, and the deliberate choice to define the terms. I realized then that closure was not a single act. It was an accumulation of subtle victories, moments of self-realization, and the steady reclamation of power. My parents' presence, their small confessions, and the cracks in their composure were a mirror of the life I had built despite their absence. I understood that peace did not require their perfection, nor did it hinge on their complete understanding. It was mine to claim, quietly, deliberately, and irrevocably. As the stars shone overhead, the mansion bathed in soft light, I allowed myself to smile faintly. 8 years of exclusion had not broken me. The silence between us was not a void. It was a language of power, reflection, and eventual reconciliation on my terms. And in that quiet, I finally felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by the certainty that I had reclaimed my life, my peace, and my boundaries. The night grew deeper, and my parents remained at the gate, shadows softening under the glow of the porch lights. I understood that this moment, though silent, was complete. I had observed, reflected, and chosen. Closure, I realized, was not about words alone. It was about presence, awareness, and the deliberate assertion of self. And in that understanding, I found peace, quiet strength, and the freedom to move forward without resentment or lingering doubt. As the night settled and the stars glimmered above, I finally felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. My parents remained at the gate, their presence quiet, tentative, but acknowledged. In that silence, I realized that closure wasn't about forcing apologies or demanding recognition. It was about reclaiming my peace, honoring my boundaries, and understanding my own strength. 8 years of exclusion had shaped me, but they hadn't defined me. Tonight, I stood whole, resilient, and free, ready to move forward on my terms.